Hello, good afternoon. It's great to be here. My name is Rafal Zaborowski and I'm a lecturer at King's College London. Of course, ideally, I would be there in person. We would all see each other, but I'm hoping you had a great day, a great first day and second day. And I'm very happy and privileged to be here virtually. Virtually is, of course, the key word here, as my talk today is called Virtually Authentic, Co-Creating Hatsune Miku. And first, I would like to start with a picture of said Hatsune Miku here on the left. This is Hatsune Miku. I'm sure you're familiar with Hatsune Miku. Hatsune Miku has long hair in a color that matches her eyes. She has futuristic electronic arm sleeves. That's really all we know for sure, right? But is she friendly or arrogant? Is she outgoing or introverted? Is she hardworking, lazy, sensible, or reckless? The answer may depend on your age, your interest in music, your music education, your personality. And this is what I would like to talk about today. I will discuss the processes which fans of Vocaloid music, that is music performed by Vocaloids like Hatsune Miku, engage in to co-create the meanings behind these holographic personas. I've discussed some of this in my articles and chapters on Hatsune Miku, and I will draw on that work today as well as on my upcoming book on Japanese music audiences, but today I will especially focus on Miku as a co-evolutionary product of virtual collaboration by creators and fans. So to do that, I discussed ethnography data from a decade of research in Japan, drawing critical comparisons between Vocaloid enthusiasts and pop idol fans. I will argue that to understand Hatsune Miku, we need to simultaneously look at different moments in which meaning is created. Here I follow Paul Duguay and his colleagues involved in writing the seminal book Doing Cultural Studies, who worked to analyze meanings imbued in an artifact. In their case, it was a Sony Walkman. It was necessary to investigate production, reception, identity, representation, and regulation. So the 5 moments on the circuit of culture, as they called it. These are important because a change of conditions in one moment dynamically affects all other moments. So to follow that and to understand Hatsune Miku, we need to do a number of things. Right? We need to listen to her songs, of course, like Melt here on the slide, but we also need to see how these songs are performed. First by her, then by the audience, be it at home or at the karaoke parlor. We need to see conditions of productions on the Vocaloid market and consider a whole range of other factors, be it socioeconomic, cultural, generational. All these underpin each singular moment of engagement with a Vocaloid song. So I start with Japan and the presence of music there. The Japanese context is interesting for a number of reasons. First, the Japanese music market is the second largest in the world, although the measurements often change and vary depending on what is actually being measured, but generally it is. And we also know that music constitutes a very large portion of media consumption of Japanese audiences. Here on these 2 pictures I've taken on my various periods of fieldwork, we can see the amount of music sort of in everyday life. On the right hand side, amount of magazines dedicated just to music, and in a bookstore. Then on the left hand picture, shelves on a CD rental shops dedicated to Vocaloid music. So there's a lot, right? But there's just CD and magazines. Then of course we have the staggering amount of music on Japanese television programming, including music shows, charts, karaoke shows, genre programs, music-related quizzes, competitions. All this accompanied by industry, by the production of instruments, new teaching technologies, education, exports it to other countries. We can talk here about the Suzuki method, about the Yamaha music school, and so on. We can also mention music taught through school circles and reinforced through karaoke software. Some interesting findings there, to be sure. Music and musicology research often reports that in Japan we can find people with absolute pitch, for example, more frequently than we can in Europe, reasons for which linguists and musicologists still sometimes argue about. But you know, the fact that is that there is a lot of music and music has a very strong place in society and in everyday life. And I mentioned Yamaha music schools because they have an obvious link with Hatsune Miku, as Yamaha corporation is behind the Vocaloid. The Yamaha music school started in Japan in 1954, expanded overseas in 1965, starting with the US, countries in Asia, some later, some earlier, in the UK in the 70s. But all of these branches, they share the same aim. It is to bring enjoyment of music to mediocre children and develop children who possess superior talent, right? So there's a quote from Kawakami, mentioned Miranda, and it's interesting. So this dual goal, right? And so the goal, in other words, not only to produce exceptional artists, but also to musically develop the ordinary audiences, to develop what Looney and Kawakov quoted again in Miranda, call it the sort of conscious music audiences. And this idea of general, ordinary, conscious music audiences will become significant later, as it underpins how people interact with music and how knowledgeable they are about music. But let's talk about the Vocaloid and Hatsune Miku now. What is Hatsune Miku then? Who is Hatsune Miku? Well, first of all, Hatsune Miku is a virtual idol. That means she does not exist in the physical sense, which I am sure you are familiar with. She's a music performer whose voice is constructed from syllables pre-recorded by a voice actress, Fujita Saki. The audience doesn't need to know the actress behind the voice. Some fans might know her name, but generally many people I talked to did not. The audience knows Miku through her music, which is composed and released commercially and uploaded on sharing sites by amateur producers, by professional producers. But also, Miku stars in video games, commercials, and comic books. Hatsune Miku began as a commercial software package, the so-called Vocaloid voice synthesizer. And as sometimes idealized story of disruptive marketing goes, a Vocaloid was developed by Yamaha in 2004 and enjoyed very modest success in Japan as a tool for bands without a vocalist. The project really took off 3 years later when different company, Krypton Future Media, developed the software further and focused on the marketing of the animated personas on the cover. And the consequences were tangible. Vocaloid was not just a program anymore, if it ever had been, but became a virtual idol and your own personal singer, one that you can choose from a range of software packages, unique voice banks that are available. Because the software allows users to assign musical notes and voice effects to words, and then have them sung back using a voice bank. It means you have a personal idol that not only sings to you whenever you want, but it sings to you in a way you want them to and sings about things you want them to sing about. And what do we know about Hatsune Miku from the software? Well, here on top you have the information that was included on the software packaging. It informs us of her name, age, height, weight, and interests, her favorite tempo, and her voice range. Right? It's all had to do with singing. And that's really it. Right? There have been numerous other Vocaloid personas emerging globally since 2007. You can see some of them here. But Miku remains the most recognizable and most commercially successful. And it's linked to numerous hit songs, television commercials, games, movies, and most notably perhaps it tours the world on stage, including sold-out performances in front of thousands of fans in Asia and US and Europe. In fact, just before the pandemic lockdown in London, we had a Hatsune Miku concert here. And of course we could talk about this global aspect more. We could talk about the relationship between Yamaha and Krypton a little bit more, which got a bit complicated last year, but that's perhaps not the focus of the talk today. Here we should stress here that although the idea of a virtual idol sounds new and exciting, it's of course not the first time we may be theorizing this as such. You may know of the Archies, You may have heard of the music of the band Gorillaz. You might have watched Alvin and the Chipmunks. They are all a kind of virtual band, right? I mean, bands performing music in which human was obviously involved behind the scenes, but they are not visually represented by a human on screen or in person. In the same way, you might have seen Tupac as hologram, and more recently Whitney Houston virtual concert as well. But none of these phenomena, I would argue, intersect so many different factors and contexts I've discussed earlier. Vocaloid and Hatsune Miku are quite special in that way. But why do people listen to Hatsune Miku then? Well, one thing I heard over and over from Japanese fans of Hatsune Miku and Vocaloid in general is about the stories they represent. Here is one participant saying that unlike other music, Vocaloid music has ordinary stories. It's like playing a game, like reading a novel. You are in it. You are part of the story. So it's interesting, this emphasis on ordinariness, which is a common trope in Japanese popular culture, but also emphasis on audience agency, on this gap feeling as the role that the listener has to play, not just a passive recipient, but as a participant. But was my favorite and most annoying question to ask to Vocaloid audiences, isn't the voice always the same? Where is the pleasure of listening songs where the voice is quite similar across all the recordings? Right? After all, the voice bank, although recorded by different voice actors and actresses, undergoes heavy digitalization and in the end sounds quite similar. Especially within one voice bank, I mean, there's only so much you can do in terms of setting the pitch, the tone, the warmth of the voice. But Vocaloid audiences I interview see this differently. It is precisely because the voice is the same, you can appreciate the quality of the melody and the lyrics, said one participant. And the voice is not the same, says another. The voice sounds different when I'm sad or when I'm away from home. So there we see glimpses of different interpretations already. And then, because the pre-recorded voice bank leaves the musical arrangement in hands of anyone who purchases the software, the artistic possibilities are seemingly endless. I don't need other music, says this person, because there are hundreds of more people creating these songs. There are different styles, different types of music within the Vocaloid genre. So perhaps now it's the time to listen to a little bit of Hatsune Miku in concert. Let's do that. That should be enough, I think. So, yes, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there, isn't it? There's the holographic image of Hatsune Miku on stage. Interestingly, it is accompanied by a live band around her. A band that the audience does not necessarily care about. It is clearly the Hatsune Miku who's the only star. Hatsune Miku interacts with the concert goers who brought their own glow sticks, who dance in prearranged routines and who react to the singing hologram with chants as well. So, next I would like to talk about this element of reality and authenticity that both sides sort of bring to media events like this. And in my research, I interviewed two groups of music fans. On the one hand, I was interested in fans of pop idols, who make up a healthy portion of Japanese music audiences because of immense popularity of idols. And on the other hand, Vocaloid fans, right? So fans of Hatsune Miku and other Vocaloids. And one interesting finding is that both groups raised the same argument as to why they listen to virtual idols over non-virtual idols, or the other way around, right? Depending on which group you're in. So both groups said they listen to their idols and to their favorite artists because they are real. Right? Look at this is real. But what is real then? Some of it links to fans' perspectives on production and distribution models. Most of idol and pop music in Japan is produced under the so-called office system, Jimsho, characterized by power concentrated in hands of management office, with infamous practices of control and blacklisting acts to retain that control. In other words, it operates through a sort of not a musician-agent relationship, but sort of artists as salaried employee system with very little creative input. Vocaloid and Hatsune Miku, on the other hand, then emerge here as an alternative. We might discuss to what extent this is an alternative and whether it is really a break from the Jimsho system. But as far as audience perceptions go, the differences are definitely there. The fact that Vocaloid songs start with a new type of creative license based on the characters. The fact that the purchase of a Vocaloid software is theoretically available to anyone, which blurs the line between producers and fans, and everything else that comes with it. So this makes it more authentic for some audiences. This is where the authenticity is on the Vocaloid side, on the virtual idol side for many. And much of the difference between idol audiences and Vocaloid audiences is conceptual and concerns what we mean by real, what we mean by authentic. Vocaloid music fans of Hatsune Miku deem their music as the real freedom of expression. You can see here, you can look at the idol, look at the girl groups, all fake. And so for Vocaloid fans, paradoxically, it is the singing teenager that is fake, not the hologram. It's because teenage idols play carefully defined roles by their management, while in Vocaloid, on the other hand, there is no pretense, no fabrication. So Hatsune Miku is real also because the audience expects there to be, based on the pop cultural history of cyborgs, androids, machine-enhanced singers. The audiences make Hatsune Miku real because she thinks about things that matter to them, with the perception being that the songs are created by a demographic closer to them, right? By somebody from a demographic closer to them. And finally, she's real because she represents a bottom-up collective model where access and participation are potentially unlimited. On the other hand, of course, the physical pop idols, the teenage pop idol fans in my research would downplay these issues and focus on the effort of idol performers. For them, authenticity is not built on the creative process, but on materiality. You cannot shake a hand of a virtual idol. You cannot see them train. You cannot see them improve, right? You cannot go and meet them. But also, it emerges as a marker of socioeconomic divide of these audiences here. As most of my rural and small-town participants note that, well, these events, those handshake events, those concerts, may be inaccessible for them from a practical side, from an economic side, from a sort of logistic side anyway. It does not matter if Hatsune Miku is human or not, as another participant says, because I could never meet her anyway, even if she were. So the emerging pattern here is music listeners that are not naive, and they are well aware of intricacies of music production in Japan. This goes back to music education, this goes back to those conscious educated music audiences I mentioned earlier, and that knowledge informs their listening choices. Vocaloid enthusiasts quite naturally often bring up the issues of authorship, of management and production. Here, in a critique of the idol industry, a Vocaloid fan says, well, people who write songs for Hatsune Miku, this is just a bunch of talented people using the software for everyone to enjoy. They don't have to go through the industry, they just upload. Nobody tells them what to write. They're not like those old people, like managers in offices who order teenagers to sing about the summertime or first love or whatever. The producers really write the songs. So there is this argument that these are normal, ordinary people like us. These are not old guys who got, high in the company based on hierarchy, based on their time there. So again, we can discuss to what extent it reflects reality, what other barriers sort of Vocaloid producers face, and I will talk a little bit about this in my last bit today. But this is fascinating overall because, to an observer, it is perhaps not immediately obvious in what ways writing lyrics for Hatsune Miku, who, as we said, is a 16-year-old virtual diva, significantly differs to idol producers telling teenagers what to sing. But for my participants, for audiences, these two could not be more distant. But I want to talk about co-evolution of practices between producers and fans and how the direction of efforts of production are closely linked to audiences' changing modes, routines, and choices. So here we have a quote by a producer from a big label in Japan who was telling me about differences between idol music and Vocaloid music. He says, idol music users are not that interested in high quality sound. We can see that we get no complaints about it. There's little value investing in it. On the other hand, my interviews with the audiences add additional layer to this narrative as the listeners point to their routines. Since much of the music is consumed on the go, the rise on the drop in quality becomes unnoticed. The Vocaloid song producer's point of view is represented by this quote from an industry rep saying that Vocaloid music remains tricky. There's a certain convention to writing the songs for sure, but it's more eclectic. You need to be more creative. You need to think about the voice and personality right. So again, there's this second guessing the audience and linking the personality to a holographic avatar, which I will now talk about. And then there's the generational aspect. For me, it's interesting to see how generational positions differ in the reception of Vocaloids. We can see that for the older cohort, the so-called lost generations, called the Japanese Generation X, the enjoyment of Vocaloid, the proximity they feel to Vocaloid is in familiarity. It was natural for them. It is natural for them that the Vocaloid producers would start at the bottom. They eventually get picked up in a sort of idealized salaryman journey. It's a natural process of learning, of experience, of effort. And Hatsune Miku for them is seen through the history of robotics, the Japanese superior manufacturing, motives of national identity and social cohesion. For the younger cohort in my study, the so-called relaxed generation, the Yutori Sedai, the Japanese Gen Y, proximity comes from authenticity. They are the ones strict by the educational reform. They feel distrust towards authorities. For them, working hard has not yielded the reward. And they see Hatsune Miku through the lens through protest against hierarchy, emphasis on individual expression, authenticity, creativity, but also this distrust towards power structures. Another important part of understanding Hatsune Miku is the performers. So thinking back to the clip I showed earlier, I mentioned how important it is to think about how these performances are recreated in various places. Here is me accompanying some high school students to their usual karaoke hangout in central Japan. You can see some of it in the pictures. You may see how much of the performance is being recreated in different ways. The dance is there, some of the fan gestures, the mannerism and the reactions are being recreated in the small karaoke room, but also with elements of creativity and innovation. The young people are playing games, adding their own lyrics. One of the girls here covers part of the lyrics for others to guess or invent. So overall, in this small space, many meanings of what a Vocaloid is are being introduced and negotiated. In one such encounters, I had a very revealing discussion with two high school students, and they were singing over and over a song by Hatsune Miku called Melt. Incidentally, it's the song that I played to you earlier. Written by Ryo from Supercell in 2007, has millions of views on Nico Nico, very popular song on Japanese sharing platform. Released in 2009 to a huge commercial success, numerous covers by famous people. And as I wrote about this song elsewhere, musically it's very catchy and quite complex for Vocaloid pop song. Lyrically though, it's a sort of epitome of contemporary Japanese pop, idol pop writing, right? The protagonist is deeply in love, but unable to confess the feelings. So first the protagonist prepares for a date. You can see the first part of the lyrics here on the screen. Wake up in the morning, cut my fringe just to be asked about it later, carefully choosing the clothes. But in the end, the protagonist goes on a date, is unable to confess her feelings. I melt, as the song goes. I cannot even look them in the eye. So it is a great song, and I'm in the karaoke room watching two young men perform it a number of times. Didn't matter to them that the song is very fast, has an impossibly high pitch. They shout out the chorus together, divide the song into sort of official part, the unofficial fan calls, added fan lyrics, all while dynamically gesturing, just like participants of Hatsune Miku concert that the small town boys could have only seen online. And at some point I raised my objections and I said, well, I love the creativity and the fan dances, but is there more to it? The voices are interchangeable, the lyrics are quite superficial, which is obviously not how I phrased that then. The boys wouldn't have it though. They were very excited to tell me I was completely wrong, and I was. See how she prepares herself, how she talks about making herself look cute with a pink skirt and her flower accessories, said one of them. This is not the real Hatsune Miku. She's being playful here. She tries to be more cutesy, girly, with the pink dress and all because she likes that one boy. But that's not who she is. It's just a ruse. Waits for the last part. And we waited for the last part, and here's the last part on the screen. I melt. I want to walk holding hands with you. Is it goodbye already? Hug me now, or something. And as soon as we sang these lyrics, the boys looked at me knowingly. This apparently explained everything. Miku, in a song, was apparently pretending to be someone she's not. She has a crush, sure, but she was not one to obsess about dresses or to become speechless in social situations. No, Miku is cool. Most of the song is ironic, says the boy. It does not seem like a Miku song at first. It's too sweet, I was told. But by the end of the song, Miku just can't help herself. The girly facade is down and Hatsune Miku's real personality comes through. And the fact the boys got all of that from Or Something, which in the original is Nantene, was quite fascinating. Right? Fascinating because it's an illustration of how singing personas are read and negotiated by Vocaloid fans. Such discussions take place online very frequently. The online forums are full of threads concerning personalities of Vocaloid. You can see some examples here from English-speaking forums, although there are much more in Japanese. They can result in disagreements and it can get ugly. But quite often these are discussions of songs like this and how they may or might not fit a performer based on what the audience think their personality is like. Just like we have here a post asking, well, what do you guys think about the characters of Vocaloids? Here's what I think. And we see they think Hatsune Miku is usually cheerful, but sometimes can act like a diva. Other posts think she's been childish. So there are some similarities and differences. So such textual and paratextual negotiations reveal strong emotional realism, to borrow the term from Ian Ang. But Vocaloid fans go beyond the individual level. This meaning-making takes place across multidimensional interactive processes. Here in the Vocaloid audience, the audience does not merely fill in the gaps left by producers. Rather, through technology, they actively participate in and shape performer personas. The multiple threads linking audiences' practices, producer strategies, and the complexity of text go back to the circuit of culture. However, it goes beyond that, showing limitations of the model and the very idea of what a text is. On the other side of the spectrum, there are Vocaloid producers, often fans themselves and often also part of those debates. Here is a producer explaining how writing a Vocaloid song is not always liberating and not necessarily as free of artistic pressures as the audience might think. The producer says, well, it ended up being troublesome the more I thought about it. What if I get it wrong? I mean, there is no wrong, but then again, obviously there is. Maybe if I didn't know about the internet discussions about the personalities of hologram personas, it would get easier. But again, without those discussions, I would never be inspired to get a Vocaloid copy in the first place. So for a semi-amateur, as this person is, The fact that he has to consider those internal discussions about the character and identity, the canon and the head canon, it becomes an additional layer of meaning and perhaps even a barrier, although he obviously talks about this humorously. And so the creation of Hatsune Miku spans across the number of dimensions of production, distribution, and reception. It intersects generational, class, and geographical factors, and is dynamically shaped by market and cultural forces. I asked at the beginning, who is Hatsune Miku? Paraphrasing one of my participants, Hatsune Miku is like a friend who you know very well. But then you learn that other people know her well too. And when you talk with her with a friend, first you both sort of agree who she is in general terms, but the more you discuss, you realize there are two different Mikus. And then you meet someone else, and they have a yet different image of her. That's Miku for you. Thank you very much for your attention.